Karens can come in all shapes and sizes, but there's one thing that they all have in common: incredibly entitled behavior. But as these real-life stories prove, sometimes karma comes knocking, and in the case of the dad who is accused of harassing his own kids, all it takes is one sentence to put a Karen in her place. While shopping in the grocery section of Walmart, I encountered a situation where a woman with 2 young children had positioned her cart in a way that blocked my access to the shelves. She seemed to be shopping by crossing the aisle and adding items to her cart. Respectfully, I stood near her cart and patiently waited for her to move it. However, it appeared that she either didn't notice me or simply didn't care. At one point, when she returned to her cart, I politely informed her, "Excuse me, I just need to reach something behind your cart." Unfortunately, she completely ignored my request and turned her back, resuming her walk to the other end of the aisle. After waiting for around 5 minutes, hoping she would wrap up her shopping, I decided to move her cart about a foot to gain access to the item I needed. Her reaction was deranged. To my surprise, she abruptly turned toward me and exclaimed, "You touched my cart." It's important to note that this incident took place before the pandemic. She started to sprint back to me, screaming at the top of her lungs. I was absolutely terrified and frozen in place. She was yelling that I had no right to touch her cart. Trying to defuse the situation, I explained that I only had moved it momentarily to retrieve my item and urged her to calm down. Her response was unforgettable. Ironically, she shouted at me, "No! You calm down. You're causing a major scene." I've seen a lot of weird stuff go down at Walmart, but that's probably my most memorable experience there. During my time at a major department store chain, specifically in the gift wrapping department, the Christmas season was incredibly busy. This particular incident took place on my final day of temporary work before returning to college after the Christmas break. As I spotted a woman approaching me with a massive stuffed animal, I could sense trouble brewing. She politely asked if we were able to wrap the stuffed animal, which happened to be almost as large as I am. I explained that we unfortunately didn't have gift boxes of that size. I offered 2 alternatives, either assembling 2 corrugated cardboard boxes or carefully tying a big, attractive bow around the stuffed animal's neck. Regrettably, these suggestions didn't satisfy the customer, and her reaction was extreme. Without warning, she leapt over our counter, frantically searching through our selection of gift boxes to find evidence that we were lying to her. She completely ignored my pleas for her to stop, so I decided to call security. I got some backlash for it, but faced with a customer who was behaving like a wild animal, I felt like I had to do something to protect myself. The belief at that store was the customer is always right, regardless of the actual reality that some of them are unhinged. A lady asked if she could go ahead of me in the line to get her prescription. She said she was very sick. Unfortunately, I was also feeling really sick and could barely stand. The line was long and there were about 12 people waiting. I was just about to let her go ahead because she was older, but then she suddenly started yelling. She said I was heartless. I stayed calm and told her that she didn't give me a chance to respond. She then said I didn't have a soul. That was the final straw. I just nodded and said, "You're right. You can go to the back of the line." She tried to cut in front of a few people behind me, but they all said no. I even heard one guy say, "Sorry, I don't have a soul either." Today, I had an encounter at the public pool that I'd like to share. I managed to find a spot in the shade for my chair, being considerate of not taking up too much space so others could also enjoy the shade. However, I noticed that there were 5 towels spread out beside me. They were occupying almost all the shade. Surprisingly, no one seemed to be using them even after an hour. While I was away from my chair, enjoying the sun with my son nearby, a woman approached me with a snarky tone. She asked if the chair was mine. I confirmed that it was and offered to move it if she desired. I didn't catch her response clearly as I was listening to a podcast, but her unfriendly expression was hard to miss. I sensed that a confrontation might be brewing. Curious about the issue, I asked her if there was a problem. She then complained, "Your chair isn't 6 feet away from us. What's wrong with you? What if I have a sick child?" Pausing to collect my thoughts, I realized that this situation might escalate. Nevertheless, I remained calm. I knew just what to say. I smiled at her, replying, "Well, if you have a sick child, maybe you shouldn't be at the pool in the first place." As her anger settled in, I continued, "And maybe it's not fair for you to hog all the shade with 5 large towels when you're not even using the space." Before she could respond, I put my earbuds back in, turned up the volume, and made a rude gesture. In her fury, she screamed, "That's a terrible example to set in front of your son." I shrugged nonchalantly and stated, "I'm simply teaching him how to stand up against bullies." During my time as a store manager at Starbucks, I had the opportunity to encounter numerous people exhibiting some especially entitled behavior. However, there was one particular customer who proved to be quite challenging. She entered the store and ordered a venti cappuccino. My assistant manager and an experienced barista were diligently preparing the beverages, effortlessly handling each order, until her drink came along. Initially, she returned it once, which seemed reasonable, then twice, which was still acceptable. However, when it happened a third time, I began to question the situation. At this point, she started insulting my assistant manager and the barista, labeling them as incompetent and untrained. I intervened and called her over to the other side of the counter, where the drinks were rapidly accumulating. Calmly, I explained that my employees possessed extensive experience and were adhering to the Starbucks standard when making her drink. Her demand was ridiculous. She proceeded to explain that she wanted shots in a cup with the foam from all our milk pitchers poured on top to fill the cup. In the past, we used large milk pitchers, continuously steaming milk as needed. However, our current method was steaming milk per drink. She insisted that Tiffany knows how to make my drink. I informed her that no one named Tiffany worked there. I clarified, if you want 2 shots and a cup of foam, you have to order it that way. A cappuccino has both foam and liquid milk, which is why the baristas prepared it that way. There is a standardized recipe for cappuccinos. Unfortunately, she was unwilling to accept this explanation and continued to berate us for her perceived wrong drink. After she finished expressing her grievances, I took a stand, refusing to tolerate mistreatment of my staff. I suggested that she find another coffee shop to fulfill her requirements, since it was evident we were unable to serve her as she desired. This caught her off guard, leaving her stunned. However, I had no intention of letting her get away with her behavior at that moment. In a huff, she stormed out of the store. My decision to defend my staff got praise from both my colleagues and customers nearby, who were aware of the situation. I knew my staff was in the right and simply trying to accommodate her demands. Around 8 years ago, I found myself in need of a new job after being laid off from a high-paying position. This job I took on was meant to be temporary, a kind of stopgap until something better came my way. I worked as a waitress, but as anyone in the service industry knows, not all server jobs are the same. In the right place, my earnings over 4 nights could exceed $1,000. As the new staffer, my responsibility was to open up the restaurant. This involved setting up tables, restocking the bar and waiter station, counting the register, and confirming reservations for the day. Still unfamiliar with the layout, I arrived half an hour early to prepare for our 11:30 opening. Before anyone else from the staff arrived, I heard a loud knocking on the locked front door. When I got there, I found 2 elderly women eager to be seated. Politely, I informed them that we open at 11:30, but they were not willing to wait. They insisted on being seated immediately because they had a Groupon that was near its expiration date. They argued that our website stated a 10:30 opening time, explaining that we couldn't accommodate them right away. I assured them that we would take care of them when we officially opened. However, they demanded to speak to a manager. When I informed them that I was the only one present, one of them rudely questioned if I was a manager, and the other harshly remarked, "She looks too stupid to be a manager." It was an unpleasant comment, but unfortunately, it was about to get worse. Ignoring my explanation, the ladies decided to take matters into their own hands and seated themselves in the outdoor patio area. I thought it was fine since they were out of my way. Little did I know that they were not done causing trouble. They started calling the restaurant repeatedly. Each time the phone rang, I would rush over to answer. only to be met with their profanity-laced insults before they abruptly hung up. After enduring this for the third or fourth time, I finally gave up and let the phone continue to ring. Then they took it to the next level. Meanwhile, one of the ladies got up and began pounding on the door, while her companion persistently let the phone ring. Even if I allowed them inside, our cooks had yet to arrive. In the midst of this chaos, my fellow waiter, who was scheduled to join me, arrived and asked what was going on. I explained the situation, and he went outside to explain the same things I had said. Of course, they responded with the same angry yelling, demands, and insults. How dare we deny them service? They were determined to get us fired. Just as the clock struck 11:30, the entire staff was ready and prepared to serve. The two old ladies barged in, shoving their Groupon in my coworker's face, but he knew exactly how to get revenge on them. Taking a deep breath, he dramatically replied, "Ma'am, our restaurant does not accept Groupons." They were stunned silent. He continued, saying if you had bothered to read the name and address on the Groupon and compared it to the information on our front door, which you've been pounding on for the past hour, you would have realized that you were at the wrong restaurant. They slinked away, but the story doesn't end there. They took to Yelp and left a long fake review describing an awful dining experience. They claimed that our establishment was infested with rats, filthy beyond imagination, and that we should all be fired and shut down. Many years ago, I worked as a forklift driver at a warehouse store similar to Sam's Club called Pace Warehouse. During one shift, the duty manager, Jamie, was instructing me on my next task when suddenly a disgruntled customer approached him. This customer was extremely upset about the number of handicapped parking spaces in the store's parking lot. Loudly, the customer exclaimed, "You have way too many handicapped spaces in your parking lot. There are 6 spaces and only one of them is occupied by a car." Despite the customer's aggressive tone, Jamie, being a laid-back individual, simply stared at him in astonishment. The customer, however, wasn't done venting his frustrations. His next move was utterly infuriating. He demanded that Jamie make changes to the parking lot, questioning the need for so many spaces for handicapped individuals. And then he took it even further. He even expressed doubt about their ability to carry items if they were indeed handicapped. In a calm and respectful manner, Jamie replied, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but the number of spaces is determined by the law." To enlighten the customer further, Jamie continued sharing his knowledge. He told him, "The fire marshal measured the size of our sales floor and provided us with a maximum occupancy number. The number dictates the required number of parking spaces for the store as mandated by the law." The customer froze in his tracks. Now slightly humbled, he responded, "Thank you, I had no idea. I will write to my congressman right away." And with that, he turned around and left. I'm sure his congressman was glad to get that ridiculous email. I had an interesting encounter with a lady at the grocery store recently. It happened when I was waiting in line at the checkout counter, specifically the 15 items and under line. The cashier called me over since there was nobody else waiting. As I began placing my items on the conveyor belt, this woman approached me. She started berating me for being in the 15 items line when clearly I had 16 items. She proceeded to angrily lecture me about what the sign indicated. Rather than accepting her criticism, I decided to respond in my own way. She didn't know the truth about my trip. I politely divided my items into separate groups, apologizing and explaining that it would now take longer to ring up each order separately. I clarified that I was shopping for multiple families in my neighborhood who were too sick to leave their homes. The lady let out an exasperated sigh, and the person behind her advised her to calm down and gain some perspective. At my very first job, I had one unforgettable encounter with a customer. I was working as a cashier in a theme park that revolved around colorful building bricks. On that particular day, my duty was to assist at a shop that offered driver's licenses for kids. Now, these licenses were not meant to be of high quality. We used a simple HP digital camera to capture the photos, which were then uploaded onto our computer screens. There was a screen available for guests to see what we were doing with their photos. They could provide input on cropping the picture and choosing the color scheme before we printed it on a plastic card, all for a fee of $5. My task was to line up the kids for the photos, usually up to 5 at a time, hence the need for cropping. There was just one problem. Anyone who has attempted to photograph young children, especially those under 8 years old, knows how difficult it can be to make them stay still for a picture. On top of that, this was a theme park, so the kids were brimming with energy. Now here's where the story takes a turn. This particular lady, whom I'll refer to as Karen, seemed to think that it was supposed to be a professional photo shoot or something. She loudly berated me for taking what she deemed the worst photos she has ever seen in her life. To appease her, I reluctantly took a few more photos of only her kids. After about 10 minutes of attempts, I managed to capture one decent shot of them. Then, to add to my frustration, I had to ring Karen up at the cash register, where she continued to grumble about the situation. While I was in the midst of this transaction, someone approached me to ask how the process worked. Before I could even respond, Karen intervened and made my blood boil with her words. She criticized me, saying, "This man takes terrible pictures of your kids, cuts and pastes them onto a colored background, and prints them out on a card for you. It's amazing how I managed to remain calm throughout it all." This incident occurred during my 20s while I was working in the registration office of a day camp. One day, a woman abruptly entered the office. She started complaining that her children did not receive any badges in the first day package that the camp had sent out. According to the package information, the kids were supposed to wear these badges on their first day at camp. At the time, I was still quite young and had only been working there for an hour. Even worse, my boss had temporarily stepped out of the office. I had never seen the packages or badges, so I was unsure how to assist the woman. I informed her that my boss would return shortly, and she agreed to wait. In the meantime, I called my boss for guidance. When I heard his answer, I knew I was in trouble. My boss informed me that the camp office had run out of badges and suggested that the woman create them herself. After hanging up the phone, I relayed the suggestion to the woman. Big mistake. This was not what she wanted to hear, and she made sure to express her dissatisfaction. "The manual explicitly mentions the need for badges," she pouted. "I am not going to make them." I explained that I couldn't make them either, as I lacked the necessary materials. She responded dismissively, saying, "That's not my problem." Thankfully, just as the situation seemed to escalate, my boss finally returned. The woman continued to make a scene about the missing badges for her children before storming off in frustration. As an enthusiastic surf fisherman, I found myself on the beach after the designated bathing hours had ended. Suddenly, a petite 75-year-old woman caught my attention as she approached me with determination. Finally close enough, she shouted, "Isn't there a designated fishing area in this town?" It's important to note that the three of us, her husband, myself, and her, were the only individuals present on the beach. I informed her that there was no specific fishing beach in town. At this point, she launched into a tirade. She yelled about kids swimming and the potential dangers of fishhooks in the sand. Once she calmed down, I asked if she lived nearby. Much to my surprise, she said she was visiting from Florida, staying with her family. With this knowledge, I felt compelled to stand my ground. I reminded her that I was a local resident, paying substantial local taxes, and suggested she voice her concerns to the appropriate authorities in Florida instead. I used to fish on the beach almost daily. This woman happened to be the only individual who ever bothered me. My neighbors know me as friendly, and I often teach local kids to fish and share my equipment with them. Truly a mind-your-own-business moment. Back in 2008, when I worked as a service clerk at Walgreens, I had a challenging encounter one late night before closing. I had just finished ringing up a customer's item when I realized that I didn't have enough cash to provide her with the necessary change. In an attempt to make up for the shortage, I gathered a handful of quarters. However, the woman became upset and insisted that she didn't want a load of coins as her change. She demanded that I give her bills instead, even though I explained that I didn't have any. To make matters worse, she rudely ordered me to call the manager for assistance, causing a line of frustrated customers to form behind her. Since mine was the only open register due to the late hour, I couldn't ask another employee to help or exchange bills. Not wanting to further inconvenience the other customers, I paged the only assistant manager on duty and informed him of the situation, asking for the necessary cash to be brought to the register. I told the woman I was going to help the people behind her who were paying by card. To my surprise, she refused to move. They all had to wait because of her. Those 5 minutes before the manager emerged from his office felt like an eternity. I could sense the impatience and irritation growing among the waiting customers. Finally, when the manager handed the woman the bill she had demanded, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But I didn't stop there. As I thanked her, I made it clear to everyone in line that she was the reason they were waiting, not me. She stormed off in a huff. A few years back, I was living with friends in a row house. There were 5 of us, all working in IT with different shift timings. Everything was going smoothly until we moved into this particular neighborhood. Our neighbor turned out to be the fussiest person we had ever encountered. This lady would often yell at us for trivial things, but the scariest incident was when she and her husband came banging on our door at 3 in the morning. The reason why was ridiculous. She was complaining that our bathroom usage in the night disturbed her sleep. Mind you, she lived in a completely separate house, but she believed that the sound of our bathroom door closing would trouble her sleep. Despite the fact that my roommates couldn't hear anything from their rooms, this Karen claimed she could hear us from a different house. But her next demand left us speechless. She insisted that we stop using the bathroom at night. Yes, you heard that correctly. I want to mention that those of us who returned home late at night after our evening shifts took extra care to be as quiet as possible so as not to disturb the people who had morning shifts. I'd never once been woken up by one of my housemates. According to this Karen, it was our parents' fault for not teaching us how to close bathroom doors properly. But then she took it even further. She even went to the extent of finding our landlady and complaining about us multiple times, hoping to get us evicted. Fortunately, our landlady took the time to check with the other neighbors to confirm if we were causing any problems. Once she realized that Karen's complaints were baseless, she firmly told her to stop bothering her with such childish complaints. I went to the market with my family. When we got there, I took my son out of the car and started making funny faces to make him laugh. A Karen came out of nowhere and asked my wife if she knew that a creep was bothering her baby. That was rude enough, but she didn't stop there. She added, "Is he making you cry? Do you need me to call someone, honey?" I found the situation so amusing that I chose not to respond. My wife was taken aback for a moment, but quickly responded. She said, "Lady, this is my husband and the father of this little boy." Karen was completely stunned and had no idea how to get out of the awkward situation she'd created for herself. She muttered some sort of apology to my wife and quickly left the scene. That is going to bring us to the end of the video on Unforgettable Karens. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like rating, subscribe for more, comment below, and we'll be back with a brand new video very soon.